Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host for this week, Addison and Andrew Beasley is alongside me. Before we get stuck into the podcast, to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. And the link is in the podcast episode description box below. As for the podcast for today, we're going to have a little bit of a season preview, really. Arne Slot's first season, plenty to look forward to. No transfers yet, of course. The Martin Zubimendi thing isn't happening now. We've obviously had a bit of a saga with that. We've had quite a lot of other things to keep an eye on, though, across this summer. Andrew, are you looking forward to the new season? It seems to have come round really quickly to me, but I do feel excited. It feels like there's at least something different about Liverpool, even if the players are not necessarily that different.
Yeah, of course. First season for Arne Slot means that it's going to be incredibly interesting to see what happens, for good or bad. I'm confident that it should be good. Obviously, we're all a little bit disappointed in the lack of transfer activity, but ultimately, you look at Sunday. They played 2 games, fielded 2 different sides. Certainly did better in the first game, but it's not that there's a lack of players necessarily. Just a little strengthening in a couple of areas would certainly be a positive, but. It's not a cause for sort of serious alarm that they sort of missed out on Zubimendi. So, I'm feeling sort of generally positive ahead of the new season. But of course, whatever happens at Ipswich on Saturday will immediately sort of start to shape the narrative of whether it's going to be a good, bad or indifferent sort of season. And of course, it's only one game, but that's the way it works sort of these days. So, looking forward to it. And meeting up with a friend who's an Ipswich fan, hasn't seen his team in the Premier League for 22 years. So very excited about watching it. He's probably more excited than I am, I should think.
Yeah, it should certainly be an interesting one. I think Arne Slot definitely, and probably Richard Hughes as well, to be fair, given the Zubimendi deal hasn't happened, that they could probably do with Liverpool getting off to a good start, I would say. But just before we sort of work our way through the team in terms of what to expect from Liverpool this season and what we're kind of expecting in each of those positions, let's just talk a little bit about pre-season. Obviously, the results have been good. You mentioned there the double header over the weekend, where the first game certainly was good. The second game, pretty much nothing happened in that one. But I think it's fair to say it's gone pretty well, hasn't it, for Liverpool in terms of pre-season. Arne Slot says they've got no injuries, which I think is a big thing. They've had a little bit of time with some players, obviously more time with others. But what have you made of the first summer, really? Because it's not been an easy one, really, with the European Championship and the Copa America tournaments as well to contend with.
Yeah, it wasn't an ideal summer for a change of manager, was it, from that perspective, because of all the international tournaments? I mean, I've been impressed with what I've seen. I haven't watched every game live, obviously based in the UK, and most of the games happening in the US. I know some people obviously will have done, but no, I like what I've seen from the team. I think there's lots to be positive about. Obviously, they've scored quite a few goals. They haven't conceded many. Obviously, there's been some nervy moments at the back. It's certainly not been perfect by any means. I think some opposition players have missed some very big chances, and obviously the style of building up from the back does invite pressure, and there's sort of a risk-taking element to that, and that could see some teething problems with that over the first few weeks of the season. But I think you have to be pleased with what we've seen. I think it's easy to say, say they'd lost the games. It's easy to say, well, the results don't matter in pre-season. But it sort of feels like they do a little bit. Like, you don't want to go into a new season on a completely sort of negative mindset. Had they lost to both Arsenal and Manchester United, I'm sure people would be probably more upset than they are happy that they won the games. Again, sort of that's just how it works. But I think getting those results, largely good performances, and with a less than full squad for many of the games due to the late returning players who are on international duty. So yeah, I think you've got to be happy with what we've seen so far, albeit have they had a real test yet? Not, arguably not. So we'll see what we get really when it all gets underway properly.
Yeah, you can never quite tell, can you, until the first game? And I think obviously Ipswich are a new team. It's a team that you'd expect Liverpool to be able to beat, but then it's also a team away that's just been promoted. I think we'll get a decent idea of where Liverpool are at and how sharp some of these players are, and probably the system and the way that Liverpool are looking to play. I noticed this morning that on Liverpool's website, there's some quotes that Arne Slot's been speaking to Canal Plus in France ahead of the new season. He's kind of been explaining what the difference is going to be between Jurgen Klopp's team and his team. He seems to be suggesting that it's going to be more about control, which I think is I think it's probably going to be exaggerated how much of a difference there is, to be honest, because let's be honest, Jurgen Klopp was moving towards that. It hasn't been heavy metal kind of football for Liverpool for a long time now. But I suppose how much are you looking forward to just having something slightly, not completely, but slightly different to look, to watch, to analyse and to write about?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting because it's easy to assume there's going to be a change of style. And I think there will be to some extent. But then you see some of the goals they've scored in pre-season, and you could easily picture them scoring them under Klopp, particularly the Diaz one, the second, well, but probably both Diaz ones actually on Sunday against Sevilla, stuff like that. So yeah, I think a slight change of style will be good as well. If it is slightly more controlled, I think that's a good thing, because last season, there were a lot of games where Liverpool had to work really hard to win the games. They would go behind early to a team they were probably expected to beat, and then battle back and win 2-1. And all that stuff's really commendable, but it takes a lot of effort to do that. And I think it would probably benefit the squad in terms of their fitness and their, how much they're putting into games, to have a few slightly more controlled games, boring games, you might even think of them, sort of routine 2-0 home wins against teams in the bottom half of the division. But if it keeps everybody fit for longer, then that's only a good thing. And of course, back in the Champions League as well, so you can't rotate players as much as they did in the Europa League last season, an extra 2 games to fit in somewhere. All of these things to sort of take account of. So I do think it will benefit the side to play a slightly more controlled style. But it's also encouraging to see, well, they've still got that sort of sharp breaking, fast counter-attacking in them. It's all the same players ultimately. So, they're not going to forget what they've learned to this point. But hopefully if they can get that balance right between the two, then it could make for a really good season.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see the differences in sort of style of play and that kind of thing. I think what we have seen in pre-season is that they're maybe going to build a little bit more from the back, and maybe the centre-backs are going to have to be even better on the ball and that sort of thing. So that kind of leads us into the first sort of topic or area of discussion, really, in terms of what we expect from Liverpool this season. I'm going to brush over the goalkeepers. I think we pretty much know what's going to be happening in that department. But at centre-back, I think there's a bit of a question for me in terms of not just who starts the season, but how it looks as we progress. I think Joe Gomez is probably the 4th choice. Virgil van Dijk is probably the number 1 choice for pretty much everyone. But the 2 in the middle, have you got a preference at this point? And I suppose, what are you expecting for Ipswich on Saturday?
I think you have to say that Kwanzaa's got the shirt at the moment. I think you could look at that side which started against Sevilla on Sunday and assume that the majority of it will also start at Ipswich. And ultimately, and Konate didn't finish last season all that well. So it's up to him to sort of prove that he deserves the place, which I don't think he's going to do initially. I still like him a lot, and I think he's got a lot to offer, don't get me wrong. But I think Kwanzaa's the man at the moment, and it seems to work well, him and Van Dijk. So there doesn't seem any reason to change it while it's working. Yeah,
I think I'm in agreement with you. I think Kwanzaa finished last season really strongly. I'm still a big fan of Konate, but I think there was definitely a changing of the guard really in the last few months of the season. I think the game away at Everton for Konate was a particularly poor one. Didn't really get into the team after that. So that was obviously going to stick into people's minds. But I think there's a bit of a transfer question in terms of the centre-backs as well. Obviously, they've got 4 players in there. I still think, though, for me, I would have signed the centre-back this summer. It doesn't look like Liverpool are going to do that. Obviously, there's still time left, more than 2 weeks left in the window as we're talking now. But to me, it feels like there may be one short in that department as well. We know the injury record of at least a couple of those players. Van Dijk, obviously, we hope will sign a new contract, but he's still heading into the last season under the current deal that he's got. So I don't know, what do you make of the situation at the back? Are you happy with the number of players that they've got, the quality of players that they've got, or would you have maybe dipped into the market for one more this summer?
I assumed they were going to, yeah. We know they were sort of looking at Lenny Yoro, and obviously he's gone to Manchester United instead. I wasn't really sure what they were going to do in terms of how they were going to play, but it seems it's very clearly sticking with a back 4. So it's hard because you feel like, well, it should be enough centre backs, but as you say, the injury records are certainly patchy. there's also, I mean, we don't know what's happening with Sepp van den Berg. I mean, does he become the fifth choice? I don't know, but that's a possibility. I still think he'll probably leave. So I was hoping they'd sign someone, but as you say, it doesn't look like they're going to. So I guess they'll just have to get on with the four they have. I mean, it's four good centre backs, so in theory it should be fine. But it's a lot of games when you've got some injury-prone options in there.
Yeah, I think the big red flag for me is as well. It's fine if obviously all four of those centre backs stay fit, but it's not just the centre backs as well. Obviously, Robertson and Tsimikas were both out for a significant chunk of last season at the same time. So then Joe Gomez has to play there. That has the knock-on effect of having to play more minutes for those who are at centre back. So I think that's definitely something that I would have done. I can see a comment there that says we don't read the comments. Well, I am reading the comments. There's a few of them that I'm not going to put on screen because of some choice language, but I suppose the common theme, as you'd expect, is transfers. We've talked a little bit about the centre-backs. Obviously, we'll move a little bit further. Zubimendi hasn't happened. What were your initial thoughts around that? Is it a priority, do you think, for you at least, for Liverpool to go out and get an alternative to him this summer? Would it be acceptable to go with the options that they've already got?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I probably, like a lot of people, wasn't sort of hugely well aware of him before this summer. He then looked good at the Euros, obviously in the final against England. And you start reading up on him and what he does, and you think, yeah, he'd be a really good addition. So, of course, when it doesn't happen, it then becomes really disappointing. I think what we learned under the previous sort of Michael Edwards regime at Liverpool was that they didn't just sort of sign players for the sake of it. So I don't know if they say there's no alternative. I mean, I find that a bit hard to believe, but also it's sort of not beyond the realms of credibility based on how the team used to be run. And obviously fans enjoyed it in the past. Well, I won't say they enjoyed the sort of relative lack of transfers, but they enjoyed the success that signing the right, in inverted commas, players, how that worked out. So I think it's really difficult because I liked a lot of what Wataru Endo did last season. However, Arne Slot, not really sure he's taken to him. He hasn't really had a great summer, certainly, from what I've seen from the pre-season games. So in theory, I might be happy to go in the season with him there, but I'm not sure Slot is. And I'm sure quite a lot of fans wouldn't be either. So that's sort of a tricky one for me to answer on that point. Whether they do go for an alternate target, I'm just not sure they will. I think we can safely say they're not too interested in sort of what the fans think when it comes to transfers. So on that basis, it's reasonable to think that maybe there won't be a signing. But what I would say is I think, I'm hopeful Endo can have a good season, but he's got a lot of work to do, I think, to convince Slot as things stand.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think from what we've seen in pre-season, what we've seen even in some of the training sessions that we've seen, it looks to be the case that there's other options that have been preferred. I have to say, in fact, before I say this, I will caveat it by saying that I do want Liverpool to make a signing in that position, and I'm not suggesting that this is an alternative. But I did like the look of Ryan Gravenberch there against Sevilla. I think there is a big caveat with that, though, in that basically all he had to do was the on-ball stuff. The passing looked great, but we know that Ryan Gravenberch can pass. That's not a massive surprise. The issue, I think, obviously the next Anfield game is Brentford. If you've got Ivan Toney going up for aerial duels, or you've got runners from midfield, Fabio Carvalho potentially, running on to those sorts of areas, I think that could look very different. I quite liked the look of Alexis McAllister in that position last season. I think Curtis Jones can do that. The suggestion seems to be that maybe Liverpool think they've got a couple of other options that can do that, but I think that would worry me to an extent, even though there are maybe some arguments that you can make to say that the players that they've already got could do the job. Is that a kind of fair assessment, do you think, of where we're at this point? Yeah,
I think so. Like you, I was sort of impressed with Gravenberch on Sunday, was it? But as you say, he didn't have a lot to do in the defensive end of the game. I was sort of looking up, has he played there before? And he did play sort of there in a 4-2-3-1 for Ajax in the holding pair, and actually got man of the match from Who Scored for a game against Arne Slot's Feyenoord team. So whether he saw that and thought, oh, okay. But that was when he was alongside Edson Alvarez, obviously, and that's slightly different to being the main sort of defensive end of that partnership, because he wasn't, he wouldn't have been in that occasion, I don't expect. Yeah, I mean, like what I saw from McAllister last season, it's sort of so hard to know. I mean, I think with two players there, it perhaps takes off the pressure of being, the sole sort of number 6. If there's two of you there to sort of share the workload, maybe they can get around it that way. But as things stand, it would sort of feel like a bit of a patching up the problem rather than decisively solving it. Maybe in 10 games time we'll feel differently and everything will be clear. But as things stand, yeah, it looks like a bit of a sort of a cover-up solution.
Yeah, let's move on a little bit then to the rest of the midfield. I think there's certainly a number of good options around those players who, if they don't have to play holding midfield, could maybe be unleashed. McAllister being the obvious one to play a little bit further forward. I know a lot of people prefer to see him in those more advanced departments. Obviously, Dominic Szoboszlai would expect to have a better season this season compared to last season. Now he's got used to the Premier League and getting used to the consistency and the number of games and the intensity and all sorts of things like that. Is there a preferred midfield 3, do you think, for you at the moment? Because I was slightly surprised, I have to say, that Harvey Elliott didn't start the Sevilla game and played in the Las Palmas one. He looked to me like the one who would have that shirt on the right-hand side of the 3, but it looks like maybe Arne Slot prefers Dominic Szoboszlai.
Yeah, I think you could make a case that Elliott was perhaps the best player across the whole of pre-season, and certainly very impressive in the games in America. So, yeah, I think he perhaps should be in there. Perhaps Slot prefers the slightly more physical aspects of what Szoboszlai brings to the game rather than Elliott. Obviously, you can change it up depending on opponent, of course. I would have Elliott in there, probably with McAllister, but then also, I like the other players as well. It's hard to pick. They've sort of got a lot of good midfielders, but have they got the right ones for how they want to play? Possibly not. Or how do you fit them together? But I think based purely on his performances in pre-season, I would have Elliott in the team for Ipswich. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the way that I would go. I do feel a little bit harsh on Szoboszlai because I'm a big fan of him as well. Maybe he could play off the left side to get them both in at the same time. I don't know. I'm also interested by what Liverpool do with Bobby Clark as well. I think maybe if he was to move on, that would maybe leave them a little bit short as well. I mean, we've spoken there about the quality of these midfielders. I wonder whether there's an argument that they might need one more just in terms of numbers as well. If Liverpool are going to play more games and have maybe less options. Obviously, Bobby Clark would have played more in the Europa League last season if he'd have been fit, but maybe not as much more in the Premier League matches. But to lose him and not bring anybody else in, if that is to be the case for Liverpool, it almost feels like there might be one short in that department, just in terms of volume, really, for me as well.
Yeah, because we have to remember that, these days with the 5 substitutes, it's very easy to give lots of players lots of playing time, can't all get starts. But it means you're sort of rotating through your players quickly and playing 2 games a week and stuff like this. So, yeah, it seems an odd one to probably sell Bobby Clark without getting a replacement. I don't think he would have started loads of games, but like we're saying, if they can win a few games more easily, guys like him can be coming off the bench and protecting who you might consider your sort of top 3 or 4 midfielders. So losing that option again, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless there's an enormous sort of bid coming in for him. I must admit, I'm not sure quite what the deal is with him going, but. Yeah, it just seems like the squad is shrinking, and you can sort of make a case for the decisions making sense. Good price for Carvalho, and obviously Matip and Thiago getting towards the end of their careers, allowing them to leave and stuff like that. In isolation, the decisions to let the players go, most of them make sense. But then it's like, well, if you don't bring anyone in, you're running these risks. And I guess it's something Liverpool have kind of always done, or in the last sort of few years, and it hasn't always paid out for them, because ultimately. We could talk about, tactics and statistics and players and all these sorts of things. But ultimately, if you look at a graph of Liverpool's injury record against their points record for like the last 7 years, it matches almost perfectly. And as soon as they've always got a sort of pretty good squad, but as soon as they get a few injuries, it snowballs, like you were saying as well. If Tsimikas and Robertson are out, you lose a centre-back option because he has to play left-back or whatever. So it all spirals from there. And obviously the bigger the squad you have sort of mitigates that to some extent, because you're not losing quality when you have to bring somebody in. So yeah, to lose these guys without replacing them, it is a risky strategy, and it's one that's burnt them in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably unfair to say this necessarily at this moment in time, because we don't know what's going to happen. But it almost feels to me like there are managers or head coaches, as it is with Arne Slot, that come in to the Premier League and maybe slightly underestimate the number of games and just how thick and fast it's coming. I think Jurgen Klopp learned pretty quickly when he came to Liverpool that actually you need a bigger squad, you need more of these players. I suppose that the counter argument would be Pep Guardiola has a smaller squad and manages to keep them going, but maybe it's like you say, they can be 5-0 up at half time and then take off a couple of players. Liverpool probably in most games and are not going to have that luxury. So I think that there's definitely a balance there in terms of getting those numbers. I am reading the comments as they come in. Do keep putting those into the chat. We'll come back to a couple of those at the end when we do a kind of more general prediction for what we think is going to happen for Liverpool for this season. But just to sort of finish off going through the squad, we'll come to the forward line as well. I'll ask you about Anthony Gordon in a second, but firstly, it looks like it's going to be Mohamed Salah, Diogo Jota and Luis Diaz as the front three. They looked all really sharp over the weekend and look in a good place. Liverpool do have a lot of options in attack. There's a bit of a question mark over a couple of them, of course, but I think this is a department where it would be nice to get a transfer addition. It would be good to get somebody else in, but are you happy with the number of options that Liverpool have got at the moment?
I think I am broadly. I mean, I saw what Jamie Carragher said recently about, they don't have that electric pace up front. And I think that is true. You could probably say that for Ben Doak, but of course he's going to probably struggle to get opportunities. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of happy with the players, but are some of them a little bit too similar? Would it be a good thing to have a bit of a slightly different option in there, bit of raw pace? Possibly it would, but I don't think you can be too upset when you've got Salah, Diaz, Jota, Gakpo and Núñez sort of fighting for three positions in the team. I mean, every club in the world would probably love to have that situation ultimately. So we can't get too downhearted for that section of the team when there's players of that quality sort of competing for the three slots.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely different variations and combinations as well. I think we've obviously seen Cody Gakpo off the left during the summer. I think that's something that I'd like to watch out for. And I suppose just with Darwin Núñez, it'll be interesting to see if Arne Slot can do much differently with him. There was a bit of talk of, a new manager might be able to play him in a different way or getting him doing a different thing. I think, though, for me, the bottom line with him is he just needs to finish a little bit better. I'm not quite sure how much impact a head coach or Arne Slot's coaching team or whatever can have on that. I mean, where are you up to with Darwin Núñez? I seem to oscillate every week about, is he going to explode or is this just going to be what he is now? He did obviously get a decent number of goals last season, but I think it's fair to say we'd all like and probably expect there to be a bit of a jump up, really, considering what Liverpool paid for him and the money that they invested. There's got to be a bit of an uptick at some point, hasn't there?
Yeah, he's such a hard player to assess because everything aside from the finishing, more or less, you'd have to be happy with. I mean, some of his decision-making at times perhaps leaves a bit to be desired, but just for the sort of chaos he causes and the amount of shots he has and stuff like that and the chances he sets up for Salah, sets up plenty of chances and gets assists for Salah and stuff like that. Like, I forget the exact figures now, but, I think he got certainly into double figures for goals and assists in all competitions last season. And when you look down the list of players who've done that for Liverpool in the sort of last 30 years, it isn't a huge list, and he has done that. So there is so much to work with. But of course, the finishing is what ultimately, forwards get judged on, and that is a bit of a problem. And I've sort of been assuming that, it's okay, he'll come good in the end. But now I'm really not sure. Like, when you look at his career, he had that season with Benfica before he joined Liverpool, massively overachieving against his expected goals. And he's basically been under every other season. So if you look at his career, he's probably about on par, but it's like one hot season and the rest sort of under. So you have to think, if there's far more seasons of being under, then that probably is his level. But some of the misses last season were remarkable. You have to wonder how he's missed that. But I think there's still, there's certainly a role for him, and hopefully Slot can get a few more goals out of him. But yeah, quite how a coach can go about that, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I think maybe could help him is, again, just going back to what Arne Slot has said in the last couple of days, really, about the control. And he's talked about, Jurgen Klopp maybe wanted his players to take risks in the final third so that if they did lose the ball, they could then have the opportunity to press and win it back high up the pitch. I think Arne Slot seems to be more along the lines of keeping the ball and maybe playing that extra pass and maybe creating a better opportunity rather than taking that risk. Maybe the extra little pass or the extra angle that you create, or just that extra little bit of time really to compose yourself rather than everything being a little bit rushed maybe in the final third. Maybe that can help him, but we will see what happens. Let's move on to a couple of comments then as we sort of come towards the end of the podcast. There's been a fair few comments about transfers. I think we've obviously made clear that we would like Liverpool to do that. In fact, I did mention that I would ask you about Anthony Gordon as well. Let's finish on a question about him. Is that a player that you like and admire? It doesn't necessarily look like it's going to happen this summer for Liverpool, but I don't think it's one that's going to go away. If it doesn't happen this summer, I can definitely see it happening in the future. Where do you stand on him?
Yeah, I mean, he was very impressive last season. I was always very sceptical when he was at Everton, but maybe it's hard for any player to look that good playing for Everton in the last few years. Yeah, again, hit double figures for goals and assists in the Premier League last season. First Newcastle player to do that since '95, I think it was. So lots to enjoy about his performance last season. And yeah, I think he's a good player. It's sort of that thing. I would be happy if Liverpool signed him this summer. As he's a very good player, but it doesn't really address their needs, does it? So it's a bit of a strange one in that regard. I think, possibly like you've said there, I think they'll perhaps go back in for him next summer without having such a strong need for him at the moment. But yeah, if they signed him this week, I'd be delighted, but I don't think it would sort of solve Liverpool's immediate needs.
No, I think that's more of an opportunistic one, isn't it? That was the word at the start of the summer, the fact that Liverpool try and go for these players that maybe they want in the long term, don't necessarily need right now. Probably something they should have done with a number 6, probably 2 or 3 summers ago now, but obviously didn't do that, and now having to play catch up a little bit. But let's go across to a couple of comments then. There's a couple along a similar line, really. One that suggests that Liverpool might finish outside of the top 6, which I noticed was something that Gary Neville was predicting this morning, which frankly, I think is just absolutely insane to come up with a prediction like that. But another question here of, do you think Liverpool will get into the top 4? It says that the rivals around Liverpool have improved a lot. I'm not sure I agree with that, to be honest. I'm not quite sure. Well, certainly Liverpool haven't got any worse than what they were last season. If anything, I think a couple of the players could help them get to another level. But I'm not quite sure that the rivals below Liverpool have got that much better either, to be honest. I'm not massively convinced by Manchester United. They've still got the same manager. Aston Villa are going to have Champions League football. Tottenham, okay, they've spent a lot of money and they were quite good last season. But again, I do wonder with them. I don't think they had European football at all, did they, last season? So they'll be back in that now. I'm not sure that Liverpool's rivals have improved, but I am pretty sure they'll be in the top 4. What's your prediction, Andrew, in terms of not just Liverpool, but maybe one of the 2 or 3 of the teams around them or below them?
Yeah, I think I basically agree with you. We have to remember last season that Liverpool were top in the first week of April, and all right, it fell away quite badly at the end, but that's going through sort of 3 quarters or more of the season in title winning sort of position, and so they're not gonna fall away that badly. I mean, I think there's a chance they could get better or at least perform better, and then the results fall where they do. But obviously, if they're a bit more controlled, dominate the so-called easier games a bit more often than they did last season, then they should get better. Like you, I'm not convinced that the sort of teams below them are going to be massively better either. I think so. You look at someone like Chelsea, obviously invested so much money that there'll be Liverpool fans who would like Liverpool to sort of act in a similar way, but they weren't great last season. Throwing more new players and a new manager into the mix, it's hard to see them getting better. Again, as with you, sort of slightly skeptical about Manchester United. I think they've sort of been signing some potentially good players, but they were really, really, really bad last season. Like if you look at the data, I think they probably should have finished about 6th bottom or something like that. So it's hard to see them immediately sort of improving massively just by signing these players. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's kind of boring suggestion, but the same top 3 as last season with Manchester City, Arsenal and Liverpool. I was impressed with Arsenal last season. I do wonder if this is the year that Arsenal finally make the step and win the league, because their data was very impressive. You never know with sort of, Manchester City. We'll probably see the same thing where they have a slow start and then win the last 20 games in a row or whatever. But it feels like this could be a year where Arsenal do it. You often see teams sort of finish second for a year or two and then take that final step. I'm not quite sure why it works like that, but it has seemed to, if you look back through the Premier League. So maybe this is their time. I'm certainly not saying Liverpool can't win the league, but I think it's going to be a big ask with everything that's going on at the club this summer to hit the ground running quite that well and maintain it with the expanded Champions League and everything else, particularly if they don't sign anybody, which is obviously a possibility at this stage with the way they're going. So I'm confident Liverpool can be top three, as much because I'm not convinced by the teams chasing them, as you say.
Yeah, in complete agreement with you there with City as well. I think City go into it as favourites. Arsenal, at some point, they're going to have to take that next step. Otherwise, there will be questions about them and Mikel Arteta. But even, City and Arsenal, I'm not saying that Liverpool will definitely overtake them and definitely win the league or anything like that. But, Julian Alvarez, I think, is a big loss for Manchester City. I think it's going to be underplayed because of Erling Haaland. But clearly, Alvarez's numbers were, we talked about Núñez before, getting double figures for goals and assists. Alvarez was the same, played a lot of minutes for them, a lot more minutes than a lot of people realise. Obviously, there's still time for them potentially to get a replacement, but I think they possibly could be slightly weaker. Arsenal, they've signed Calafiori, they might get Mikel Moreno. I'm not massively bothered about either of those two players. I wasn't particularly bothered about Liverpool buying either of them, so at the same time, you can't really say that Arsenal would suddenly be transformed into a completely different team with those two either. But we'll see what happens. I'll just finish on one more question. Teddy Cross says, football is about opportunities. Quansah and Bradley got an opportunity last season as a result of necessity and never looked back. Maybe Bajcetic, Gravenberch or Trent can take an opportunity as the number 6. Is that something that you would be I suppose hopeful of is the word? I don't think you could guarantee it with any of them. I am a massive fan of Stefan Bajcetic, but I think it's fair to say he's still some way off 100% after spending pretty much the entirety of last season out injured. Would that be the way that you look at it, or would you maybe, like me, be a little bit worried if that was what Liverpool were thinking for next season?
I mean, that's certainly an optimistic view, and I am generally an optimist when it comes to football because, you're meant to enjoy it, and I couldn't stand being negative about it the whole time. I think I'm a big Bajcetic fan as well. I think, Liverpool are coming in for a lot of criticism from fans for not addressing their needs at number 6. But, I think it's due to the various turnover in the back room and all the different sporting directors they've had in the last few years haven't helped, and that's their own fault. But I think, there could be an alternate world where Bajcetic had played there for most of last season and he's ready to go. And of course, that hasn't happened, unfortunately. But I think he's definitely the sort of long-term option there. And as for anybody else, well, I guess we're going to see, aren't we? I'm not sure about playing Trent there. And obviously, like we said earlier, Gravenberch did well the other day. So I guess he's sort of in possession for Saturday, and we'll see what happens at Portman Road. But I think everybody would just calm down quite a bit if they were to sign a number 6. But as we say, it doesn't look likely as we stand. So we'll just have to see who seizes that chance, because I guess it's even true for like Endo, not a young player, but someone's got to seize the opportunity when they get it to take that position the way things are going. And it doesn't look likely that it's going to be Endo, but who knows? Maybe he has a brilliant game against Ipswich and he's up and running. But yeah, it's let's as I say, I try and take the optimistic view, but even I've got a few doubts at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think Stefan Bajcetic, as Craig in the comments there says, I think probably would be ready for a loan this season, but that can't really happen if Liverpool don't get an alternative. I think it would probably be a necessity really for him to stay. So maybe that can be a sliding doors moment for Stefan Bajcetic. Certainly if it's not this season, I think there's definitely a big career ahead of him. But I think that just about brings us to the end of the podcast for this week. It's the last one before the football returns. By the time we're back next week, Liverpool will have played against Ipswich. And like we've both said a couple of times on this podcast, it would do Liverpool a world of good to get a good win in that. Maybe they might even have made a signing by then. But thank you very much for everyone who's watched along live or listened back to this as a podcast as well for your comments. We've tried to get through as many of those as we can. Thank you to Andrew for joining me as well. That's it from both of us though, and we'll catch you again next week.